is one of the more important position coaches you can fill. It's just kind of the engine that makes quarterback, running back, and so many of those things go. It's such a bedrock part of your offense all the way around. This is clearly a big, important coaching opening. There's no doubt about that. However, I probably think a little differently about this one right now than maybe some of the other, position coaching jobs that might come available. In other words, a lot of times you're thinking long-range thinking, hey, the next 4 or 5 years, and obviously recruiting being a big part of that. For me, and I'm going to explain more about this in the show upcoming, but for me, there's a little bit more about this. It's a little bit more short-term thinking, and while I didn't really know the Luke thing was going to happen, that if you go back and rewatch some of the vacation shows that we did last week, and hopefully you enjoyed those, but if you go back and rewatch those, there was kind of a running theme through a lot of those shows that I think that we addressed as important last week that I think now seems even more important in light of the fact that Georgia's now looking for a new offensive line coach. I'm going to get more of that, into the upcoming show. Let's see what else. West Georgia Dog fan says not too thrilled about Stacey Searles or Friend. He says, didn't North Carolina give up a lot of sacks last year? And they did. Here's one thing I will, kind of remind you of a little bit, which is that when it comes to the total number, if you're trying to judge an offensive line, sometimes the total number of sacks allowed is maybe not the best overall, measurement to use. Now, listen, I'm not trying to vouch for what North Carolina's offensive line was last season under Stacey Searles, but let me get you to do this instead. Instead of counting total number of sacks, because a team like North Carolina that throws it way more than Georgia does, that throws it and plays faster than a lot of teams do, they're going to have a lot more sacks because of that. That the better overall stat to use when you're trying to measure the effectiveness of an offensive line's pass protection is a sack rate. That's the percentage of sacks compared to the total number of passing plays called. And Football Outsiders tabulates that. I think Pro Football Focus may do some of that kind of stuff, but Football Outsiders does a lot of that kind of stuff. And you can actually measure the overall sack rate. Now, I don't know what UNC sack rate was. It may not have been very good either. But teams that throw it more, teams that play faster, are going to allow more sacks because they just have more offensive play. So when we talk about things, I'm going to do this when the regular show begins in a moment. We talk about, how good an offensive line was in its pass protection. Let's use sack rate as our baseline measurement for that, because that's one of those things that takes a team that plays slower and runs fewer plays and throws it less and puts it within the same apples-to-apples comparison with the team that plays faster, throws it more, and runs a lot more plays. And Senior Dog 54 says, congratulations to Seb Straka. Yeah, you better believe we'll get there before the show is done today. Another dog winning on the PGA Tour. And as someone like me who, come back tan, I also love this time of year because we are transitioning kind of, not the official start of spring, that's still about, 3 weeks away, but kind of the unofficial start of spring. And for me, as a golf fan, my favorite PGA Tour events are the winter swing through Hawaii, California, and Arizona. Those are just the best PGA Tour events of the year. Great courses, Riviera and Pebble Beach, and obviously the crowd around the Phoenix Open, stuff like that. That's the best stretch of PGA Tour events of the year. But the most exciting time of the year for me is, especially now they've kind of gone back to the old calendar of the players being in March again, is when you leave the West Coast and come to the Florida swing, Honda Classic, obviously, this past weekend. That is such an exciting time because in normal time, it would let you know that baseball's not too far away from starting, although this year Major League Baseball is who knows how long away from starting. But, Florida swing for the PGA Tour is just such a, to me, the unofficial start of spring. It's just kind of when the warm weather season is kind of supposed to be here. My son's about to start his baseball, and so we're just kind of all just ready to go for some warm weather stuff. So seeing Straka win at the Honda was a really good thing to be able to see. All right, so we got a lot of stuff to do here. Are we on all the other platforms? So to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch audience, thank you so much for being with us live here today. I'm excited about the show. Obviously, a lot of ground to cover. John Stinchcomb going to help us do that. Georgia's looking for an offensive line coach. Some names seem to be emerging as maybe among the most likely candidates. We will cover all of that, including the thing I believe that in this particular case, more important than anything else, and a rare sense in which short-term thinking may actually benefit you more than long-term thinking. We will cover all of that. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We are so happy to be back with you, and in fact, we'll get things going right now.
hella window and door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, looks like we could be, here we go to start the show here. Breaking news, Matt Zenitz from On3, longtime guy covering the SEC, saying that Georgia is hiring North Carolina Stacey Searles as offensive line coach. This was first reported by Dogs HQ. Searles previously worked at Georgia from 2007 through 2010. So Searles most recently at North Carolina, been at Texas before that, obviously going back to first decade of the 21st century, spent some time there at UGA. So it looks like Stacey Searles is on his way to being offensive line coach there at the University of Georgia. So this happening as we're coming onto the air here. This report here coming from Zenitz and Dogs HQ. So it looks like Searles is going to be the guy here for UGA, and we'll obviously get John Stinchcomb, some thoughts from him on that coming up in just a little bit. Quite a way to start our show. First time being back live with you again after being away on vacation last week. And obviously a lot of thoughts on this. And as we kind of work our way to the Searles part of it, let's go back and look at kind of how we get here with the decision of Matt Luke to step down. And let me begin this way by saying this. You know, the most important move that Kirby Smart probably made when he first became Georgia coach way back in 2016 was the hiring of Sam Pittman. In so many ways, that was like the bedrock part of the entire start of the Smart era. It was pretty clear that was the hire that he wanted to make to put all of the offensive identity around that. Pittman was going to be the guy, and the offensive coordinator was going to be a guy that was comfortable working with Pittman. You know, at one point in time, there was, it was not even necessarily going to be, a Jim Chaney, the guy that was really hired. It was going to be, somebody else that had kind of had, some connections to Sam Pittman. But one way or another, it was going to be an offensive coordinator that was comfortable working with Pittman, that Pittman was comfortable working with, that was going to kind of be the guy there for Georgia. And so when you look at how when Georgia first emerged as SEC champion, college football playoff, and a team that almost won the national championship in 2017, so much of that success came because of the way in which the offensive line emerged under Pittman. Obviously, Sony Michel and Nick Chubb had great years running the football, but their success rushing the football, big stat improvement year over year from where you had been in 2016 to what those two became in 2017, in some respects came because the Georgia offensive line just got better. That Sam Pittman put his stamp on that program right away. Continued in 2018. Pittman was also here in 2019. And then somewhat surprisingly, and I don't say this in disrespect to Pittman because this was a little bit of an unorthodox move, somewhat surprisingly, Pittman then got a chance to go be Arkansas head coach late in his career to become a head coach. A little atypical to see a guy jump from position coach to head coach at the SEC level. This is the kind of thing that I'm not quite so sure Kirby Smart could have predicted ever occurring. So you had this scenario where you made the big hire, as big a coup as Smart had in his first staff to bring in Pittman. You had great success, and then just like that, boom, it was gone. And I think it was fair to assume that in the immediate departure of Sam Pittman, there would be some growing pains for the program and all that. Even though hiring Matt Lucas, former SEC coach, that seemed itself like a bit of a coup, but not quite to the same level of hiring someone who was such a recognized offensive line expert, the way that Sam Pittman probably was. That there was some thought that, hey, you're going to feel the effects of no longer having Pittman here. And this is, to me, like a lot of things that happen with UGA, in that Smart has a way of making things look easier than they actually are. And replacing Sam Pittman 2 years later, winning the national championship, it's not supposed to be that easy. When you lose what had been your most important offensive assistant coach, when you lose that guy and yet 2 years later, you're holding up the national championship, all of a sudden you're making things look probably easier than they actually are. So I think as we kind of think about Georgia in transition with its offensive line here, and as we're coming on the air, it sounds like Stacey Searles is going to be that guy, most recently at North Carolina. But as you think about Georgia transitioning with the offensive line situation here again, I think the one thing you have to stop and remark on is, wow, Georgia actually weathered a pretty difficult storm actually really well. That a couple of years after losing a guy as important as Sam Pittman was, Georgia won the national championship. It's probably not as easy as Kirby Smart made it look in terms of moving on from Sam Pittman the way they did. And then you'll also think a little bit about, and as of now, a lot of y'all have had a few days to kind of deal with this, me being back on the air now for the first time in a while, the way in which kind of Matt Luke decides to move on. The fact that Luke, for now, is stepping down to step away from coaching, and he's talked about wanting to spend more time with his family, and it seems like the grind of coaching has become the kind of thing that maybe Luke either wants a brief break from, or maybe just wants to step away from for forever. He's obviously well paid as a former head coach at Ole Miss and had pretty good salary there at UGA. Presumably he's got money in the bank. He's got the freedom to be able to do this if that's what he wants to do. And the idea that the kind of the entirety of the picture of what it takes to be a coach of the SEC becoming the kind of thing that after a while you just want a little bit of an arm's length distance from, you want a little bit of a break from. That's not necessarily all that surprising to Kirby Smart. I want to take you back here for a moment to, this is Smart right after winning the national championship. This is an interview with Reese Davis, kind of like a one-on-one private interview. If you watch the video that's on YouTube of this from ESPN, Smart's still kind of tired, kind of bleary. This is the morning after, clearly had not slept very much the night before. None of us did that night, early morning after that Alabama game. And in the process of kind of talking about what's next for Georgia, what's next for college football, Smart made it very clear there at the time that, hey, there is a grind on coaches right now that he thinks kind of threatens the stability of the sport. And in light of Matt Luke stepping down, in light of Stacey Searles possibly, reportedly stepping in here, the grind that these Georgia coaches go through on a daily basis, I think it's an important reminder here. This was Smart right after the national championship, kind of foreshadowing maybe what led Matt Luke to want to step away from the job that he was doing. Here's Kirby Smart on that.
What's the best path forward? What needs to change for the betterment of the sport?
It worries me, I'll be real honest with you, where the game of college football is going. First concern I have, the best leaders and the best men to run it and be organized with it are leaving. The best coaches are going to the NFL because they get more time with their families. They want no part of NIL, portal, constant recruiting. And you say, well, why not? Go live it and see how long you want to do it. It's not what it used to be. And I see coaches left and right, a lot of them, that have stepped out of this game that are saying, I'm done. Good men, great leaders, they don't want to be a part of it. That concerns me for the future of it. Where's it going? And I'm not talking about NIL or portal in particular. I'm just saying the amount of time. Best thing the NCAA did was give February where coaches couldn't recruit and bring people on campus. But I think you got to look at the calendar and say what's best for everybody, because the amount of salaries that have gone up have made it so competitive that it's nonstop. At the top, it is relentless and nonstop. And if you can't cut it, you'll be gone pretty quick.
So that is Kirby Smart in January, right after the national championship, talking about the challenge the coaches currently face and the way, and that's kind of forcing some to maybe want to look, step away from the sport. And who knows if that didn't play a factor in Matt Luke's decision there. But as we also take the air today, you've got the reported breaking news of Stacey Searles being the replacement now for Matt Luke right there along the offensive line. Good timing for me. Coming back here, stepping into the job once again as Searles gets ready to step in the job here. I'll read you a little bit from Mike Griffith, DawgNation.com, who says that Georgia is on the brink of hiring Stacey Searles, who obviously was a Georgia assistant from 2007 through 2010. He says, the last 3 years spent in North Carolina. I had worked with Mark Richt at Miami. Obviously, spent some time, a number of different places. So that, that's kind of the story with Stacey Searles, who looks to be returning to Georgia, a job that he had before, hired by Mark Richt. This will not be received as great news by every UGA fan, just to be completely frank here, that for some fans is going to feel like a path that Georgia's previously traveled. And for a lot of Georgia fans, the offensive line performance under Searles while he was offensive line coach here was certainly not what it came to be in the Sam Pittman era for UGA. So it is certainly frank and fair to say that for a lot of Georgia fans, they're going to have, to put it generously and as kindly as possible, a little bit of a wait-and-see attitude about all of this because they didn't like the offensive lines that were maybe in place here when Stacey Searles was offensive line coach going back some years ago. I think it's also fair to say, and we talked about this a lot last week when I was doing my vacation pre-recorded shows, that the Georgia offensive line last season was not great probably, but it was probably good. Good, not great is the phrase that I've used a lot when it comes to that offensive line. If you look at a couple of the stats that I think are the most important when you measure offensive lines, one of these is called offensive line yards. This is basically the credit you give to rushing success to the offensive line. And the mathematical formula that a lot of the stat geeks, I'm not smart enough to understand a lot of this kind of stuff, but I do try to follow it because it is at least an extra level of information. What a lot of the stat geeks sort of think of when it comes to the offensive line is that when you've got 5 yards available to gain, the first 5 yards of any rushing play is credit to the offensive line. That makes sense, right? The hole is open wide, you burst through, you get 5 yards, you give the offensive line credit for that. And then over the course of time, like say anything 10 yards or more, that's all the running back. That's him breaking, a tackle. That's him, moving around a would-be tackler. Anything, 10 yards and more, if it's a run for 40 yards, you're going to say, well, 30 of that yard goes solely to the running back. So that kind of makes sense too. And in between there, like a 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 yard run, you kind of share some of that credit. So there is the thought of, hey, the first yards that you get on any rushing play are probably credit to the offensive line. With that in mind, the official designation of line yards that a website like Football Outsider or something like that uses, Georgia's actually 11th last year in offensive line yards gained, 11th in the country. That is an example of a pretty good offensive line. They were also 20th in sack rate, not total sacks allowed, but sack rate. In other words, the number of passing plays that turned into sacks, Georgia was 4.6% on that year ago. That's 20th nationally. So Georgia was really a pretty good offensive line last season, probably not as great as it was in the very best moments of the Sam Pittman era, but pretty good all the way around. And I think now there is some question and concern about, well, what happens if you lose Matt Luke? What happens if you're now even more time removed from the Sam Pittman era? What happens when you bring in Stacey Searles on all of this, which is what the hiring is reportedly going to be? And how does this impact Georgia recruiting? Maybe something that Searles was not thought to be great at when he was here going back years ago, and something that Georgia has really made one of the bedrock foundations of its of its success here in the days of Kirby Smart, recruiting those great offensive linemen in particular. Well, I think that when you look at where all this stands right now, I think in this particular case, and listen, I'm like a lot of Georgia fans, I'm not going to pretend to be different on this, that there's a part of me that kind of wonders, why are they doing this? Why is this a little bit of return to a time in the past that not all Georgia fans loved? Like why is this happening right now? And I can't necessarily fully answer that, but here's the one thing I do believe is that in this particular case, thinking in a little bit more of a short-term basis as opposed to what we might typically think of as more of a long-term basis when it comes to your position coaching hires, in this particular case, that might make a little bit more sense. In fact, now that we know that Searles is on his way to being the guy, I think there is one thing about this hire that matters almost more than anything else. Let me explain to you what that is, but first, let me take some time to introduce the show. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it is good to be back live with you today, dealing with the news as it happens. Georgia apparently hiring its offensive line coach right as we're coming on the air here. Reportedly, Stacey Searles, most recently of North Carolina, but obviously previously spending some time at UGA, coming back to the Dogs here, and we're covering that for you today. Live on video, starting at 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon. Good to be back live with our folks there in 960 The Ref in Athens today, and of course podcast form wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. It is just great to be back blasting out our content on all the various platforms today in the format that we have become accustomed. And a very big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia who make it all possible. Pella Window and Door of Georgia can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. While I was enjoying the nice, warm sunshine in the Caribbean and living the life of luxury there. I know it was pretty cold and rainy here back home in Georgia. I was hearing that a little bit. And when it's cold and rainy like that, you want to keep the heat right there where it's supposed to be, inside your home. That means better windows and doors helps keep that energy right there inside. You're not wasting money. Heating your house never been more expensive than it is right now. And so when you're dealing with all of that, you don't want all of that energy creeping out, behind the inefficient doors, inefficient windows. You don't want that going on. That's what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is there to prevent for you. They make your house feel better on the inside, look better on the outside. They're offering you great savings right now as well. Between now and April 21st, you can get 50% off qualifying installations. That's a big, big opportunity for you and all of that. Of course, they're very easy to get in touch with there as well. In fact, let me give you a couple of ways to do that. You can check them out online, pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. Or you can also give them a call, 678-638-1496. 678-638-1496. Just make sure you tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily said they would take good care of you, because I know they will. All right, we are going to get into this topic a little bit more. Stacey Searles reportedly being hired as offensive line coach. John Stinchcomb coming up in a couple of minutes. We'll get some thoughts from him on that. I've got a couple more thoughts I want to share with you. Let me also just kind of address this, which is that, in one respect, obviously the Searle hiring here being one of those things that not every Georgia fan is probably thrilled about right now. Totally understand that. This is one of those things where you sort of feel like you're kind of going back into the past, and it was an era of Georgia football that not everybody necessarily loved when it comes to the offensive line play. That Searle's this hiring will not be well received by everybody. Let me just give you, I guess, the one thing, though, that I think is going to matter here more than anything else, which is that for as important as recruiting has been, is, and always will be for UGA, I think the thing that probably matters to me right now more than anything else is how do you use the talent that you have? That we talked a moment ago about the Georgia offensive line being good last season, probably not great, not the best that it had been in the very best moments of the Sam Pittman era, certainly as measured by the running game. This rushing attack a year ago and in 2020, not what it was in 2017, 2018, and that we even said during our vacation shows last week that if you look at an opportunity for the Georgia team overall, offense in particular, rushing attack specifically, if you look for an opportunity for the 2022 version of Georgia to be better than the previous national championship team was in 2021, that you really center in on that rushing attack and how the offensive line leads the way for that rushing attack as maybe the way in which all that can go down. We talked a lot about that last week during our vacation shows, and I kind of have that on my mind too right now as the Searles hiring appears to be imminent. But the thing that's going to matter the most to me for the next offensive line coach at UGA is, what do you do with the talent that you have? That Georgia right now has a huge number of offensive linemen in the program, but in particular, you've got a handful of truly elite, relatively young prospects who thus far remain, to a degree, a little bit of a mystery to us. Now, in the one respect, one of those guys is solely because of injury. That Tate Ratledge would have appeared to have been one of Georgia's 5 best offensive linemen going into last season, gets hurt right there at the very beginning of the season, and then we never got a chance to see him again after that. That based on the hints and the promise of what he showed last spring, that Ratledge, had he played, was going to be one of Georgia's best guys. And coming back to full health, really coming into that fullness of his potential, that full fruition of what Ratledge promised, the next offensive line coach, getting that out of him is going to be very important. In fact, I spent a lot of time talking about that right before I went on vacation, that to me, he's one of the most intriguing guys in this Georgia roster right now. Taking that offensive line from what had been good, making it great, giving it a chance to be maybe even better offensively in 2022 than you were in 2021 because the offensive line takes a step forward. Ratledge was going to be one of those guys. Another one of those guys is Broderick Jones. That Jones became one of the real heroes of the national championship game because of his insertion, sliding Jamari Salyer over to the guard spot. Georgia offense just seemed to really click at the very moment in which all of that happened. And for Jones, it kind of finally seemed like his moment had arrived. After being one of those guys where, you thought he might be ready to play, you thought he might be that guy, but maybe not fully earning the trust of the coaching staff, maybe not fully earning the trust to be the guy that you put out there and you made him one of your offensive tackles, fulfilling his 5-star potential at the end of last season by the national championship game. It seemed like that was kind of happening again. Well, for the next offensive line coach, taking the promise of what was shown against Alabama and putting that on display for a full season, getting that talent out of him and getting that performance out of him is going to be crucial for the next offensive line coach. To me, making use of that 5-star is more important right now than going out and getting the next 5-star, because for now, Georgia's got enough talent in the program to be great along the offensive line if these guys will live up to a portion of the billing they had coming into the program. And Stacey Searles, who appears to be the next offensive line coach, that's his job. And if we're going to say that about Ratledge, we're going to say that about Broderick Jones, that's even more so for Amarius Mims, because we probably know even less right now about Mims after 1 year in the program than we do about Ratledge, who seemed to be more ready to play right away, and Broderick Jones, who's just kind of a year older, therefore a year more ready. But Mims may be, from a just measurable talent standpoint, he may be the best prospect of them all. In fact, we kind of highlighted Mims in particular on one of our shows last week as one of those 5-star guys that could be ready to break out, that you kind of need to be ready to break out to get the best that you can out of this Georgia offensive line here this year. So normally I would say I'm the kind of guy that's kind of thinking long-term of, hey, you've always got to be recruiting, and you do, and you've always got to be cultivating that next generation of talent, and obviously that's still true for UGA. But for now, my thoughts on this offensive line are, you've got the talent in place. Can you just coach these guys up? Can you unearth the potential? Can you keep them happy? Can you get them ready to be on the field next season, what you need for them to be? And if you do that, then in some respects, the recruiting train stays on the tracks and everything kind of operates as efficiently as it needs to. But for me, whether it was going to be Searles or going to be somebody else, that was going to be I think the centerpiece of the conversation for me is, how do you, on a short-term basis, manage the talent that you have and get them ready to play right now, right away, those former 5-stars, inserting them somehow, some way as part of your best 5 and getting that as your offensive line for the upcoming season. That's the task, I believe, that awaits Stacey Searles as he gets ready to take this job for Georgia, based on reports that are out there, including plenty more. You can read about this right now at DawgNation.com. So that's my thoughts on the matter. Let's get some more thoughts on this right now. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia Today. We'll make that kind of an unofficial kind of version of Around the Doghouse right now. But for now, let's get ready to dive in, get some more thoughts on the hiring of Stacey Searles, the next generation of Georgia's offensive line. Always a great resource to do all that. It's our buddy John Stinchcomb. Glad to have him, all of you, and me back live doing all of that right now.
From Athens and across the SEC, or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So we'll say hello to John Stinchcomb here, great former Georgia offensive lineman, All-American at that level there at UGA, and obviously a keen observer of what's happening with this offensive line right now. In transition, Matt Luke stepping away. Reportedly, Stacey Searles coming back to Georgia, stepping in as offensive line coach. John, a lot has happened with this position group since you and I last spoke. So let me begin with the Searles part, and then we'll do a lot of other things there for you as well. Searles was a coach at UGA after you were there. Do you know him, and what do you think about his return to Georgia?
Yeah, so I mean, he came after I was already in the league, but
yeah.
I do remember coming back for a few seasons. It was, during the years where we were playing some pretty good football in New Orleans. One of the years winning a Super Bowl, and talking shop with Coach Searles at the time, and thinking, this guy's sharp. He knows what he's doing, and he's a decade further along in the college ranks. I mean, most of it spent in the ACC, but someone who is a true offensive line coach in the same vein that Coach Pittman and Coach Luke, by nature, were offensive line coaches. So understands the technique, isn't going to talk you to death and offer things up that would not transfer well to the actual playing field, but knows the craft, can develop players, and obviously has good rapport with the rest of the staff. I think back at his LSU days was with Coach Smart and Coach Muschamp, and it's always a part of the network of coaches. And when you've crossed paths with someone and you have that level of respect and understand what they're about, and you still choose to bring them into the fold, I think that speaks volumes of what you your assessment of them is. I'd also say it's kind of a tricky time in the season to find top level players or coaches. Right now it's coaches to come and be a part of your staff and to find somebody that knows what Georgia's about. And I think it's also important to recognize that Georgia's in a much different place than when he was last here. But he knows what Georgia football is about. He knows what the standard is, and especially coming off of a national championship, there's an expectation that it's even higher than when he last left us.
Talking about tough timing for Georgia here. You saw on the screen there a moment ago, Searles leaving North Carolina, slated to start spring practice tomorrow. So, boy, it's really tough for the Tar Heels. I don't mean to make overly light of it, but really tough for the Tar Heels to lose their offensive line coach the day before spring practice begins. That is certainly not good news there in Chapel Hill. But, John, let me just be candid here for a moment. This news is not going to be well received by all UGA fans. This feels like a path that Georgia has traveled down before. I'm willing to be open-minded about this, but even I'm kind of left to wonder, I wonder what the master plan is around all of this. That, you can give the first-person account of having spent time around Searles. That's really valuable for the average fan who only saw the results for some of those offensive lines. For them, I think it's is this a little bit of a retreaded path here, a little bit of a well-worn path here for Georgia? What do you say to the Georgia fan who's maybe a little skeptical of going back down this path again?
Well, why? Why are you skeptical, B.A.? Was it because of his tenure while he was here?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so a little bit.
Right. And so I think that's the argument most fans would make, and I think Georgia's in a much different place. Yes, that was one of the years, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the Stafford Moreno year that Georgia team came in as a preseason ranked number 1, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And now I think the level of talent that Georgia is able to recruit is on a national level, not just offensive line-wise, but specifically on the heels of what Coach Pittman and Coach Luke were able to bring in. The talent level that Coach Searles is inheriting is much, much higher. And, that time will tell if he's able to keep it at that level, because that's now the expectation across the board, not just for offensive line play, but for every position group that Georgia recruits on a national level in a top 3 position annually. When Coach Smart first came, and that recruiting, that one of his earliest classes ended up in the top 3, and you're going, wow, it's an unbelievable year. And, this is so rare, and he's made it a regular occurrence in Athens. That's where the bar is now. And I think that's probably one of the factors that Coach Luke was looking at, is the demands of a college football coach at this point in time are higher than they've ever been. And, when he chose to step away, I think a lot of coaches and a lot of folks that know the game could go, I get it. That because of NIL, because of the transfer portal, because of the level of play and the expectations of a staff that is under the leadership of Coach Smart, the demand is always for 100% of the time. And I think when you bring in a veteran O-line coach like Coach Searles, there is a trend. You see young new coaches that have been added that have, not the pedigree, but it seems like they have the appetite to want more. I think you could say that about a couple of the hires. And then on the other side, it's, the seasoned veterans that complement the other side of things, where you have some new guys coming into the fold and some guys that have been around the block. And I like that chemistry. I like the idea of thinking in those meeting rooms. You've got fresh ideas from guys that are super hungry, and you've got the battle-tested veterans that know what you can lean on in times of stress, which is constantly in those levels. So I understand that argument of, is this a retread? How is this going to be different? But I'd say this: I think Georgia's in a much different place, and I think 10 years plus of experience since the last time we saw Coach Searles means that it's not the same coach that we got over a decade ago.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm glad that you're saying all of that. And I guess to kind of build on that a little bit more, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because while I'm not personally concerned about this, I do hear a lot of UGA fans who are the return of Mike Bobo, the return of Brian McClendon. I think both those moves and the sort of arena in which they happen, I think are really good for UGA. Now the return of Searles, it sort of feels like a little bit of kind of a replication of the past in a way in which I think a lot of Georgia fans had kind of gotten used to the dawning of a new era under Kirby Smart. What do you think of so much, I guess, previous UGA experience now returning to the coaching staff, all the way around? I think for some Georgia fans, this is a little bit surprising.
Well, I like the fact that we can look to Georgia-bred, Georgia-raised, Georgia-experienced coaches. They understand what it means to be a part of this program. I think they have an appreciation for the dedication and expectations of the Dog Nation, and want to be a part of it. I also think that you come back a different and better, hopefully, coach than the last time you left. I think the experience that you gain going into other programs, experiencing different ways of coaching and doing things and way programs operate, that you glean from those and you learn from those. What can we do better? What do other programs have that I can take and bring back to Georgia and make it better? But the draw of being a part of this program has never been higher. And I think to think just because they've been here automatically eliminates them as quality candidates, because as a team, as a program, we weren't able to accomplish what Coach Smart has and the team did last year by winning a national championship. I think it's a little naive. I think it's restrictive. The program as a whole wasn't able to accomplish that ultimate goal of winning a national championship. But that doesn't undermine the ability of these coaches when they come back to be key additions that have added value because of the experience that they've gained from the time away from the program. So I think to a man, you can say that's a really good hire across the board. And Coach McClendon coming back and the experience that he's had comes back a different coach. Same can be said for every name that we've listed of guys that were a part of our program at one way, at one time or another, and have come back.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, one of the things I was talking about before you joined us is that my feeling about this offensive line coach, and I was thinking this before I knew Searles was going to be that guy, but my feeling about this offensive line coach is maybe different than it would be for other position coaching hires that Kirby might make. Normally, I'm all about, recruiting and forward thinking and how many great prospects can you get into the program. But given the current makeup of this offensive line talent at UGA, to me for right now, John, I got to tell you, I'm a lot more short-term thinking. First of all, it seems like that for programs like Georgia, the coaches cycle through so quickly anyway, that for me right now, this is about how do you use the elite talent that's in place here? It's Amarius Mims time. It's Tate Rowledge coming back from injury time. It's Broderick Jones, full season time now. You and I talked about this a lot last week when I was on vacation for our pre-recorded show. It seems more important now in light of the Searles news and the departure of Matt Luke that the real issue for the offensive line coach at UGA in 2022, no matter who it is, what do you do with the talent that you have? And you can't have guys like Mims on the bench. You can't have guys like, Broderick Jones as kind of a part-time player, that these are measurably, I believe, elite prospects, and getting the most out of them is the job for whoever your offensive line coach is next year.
Yeah, no question. I mean, the time is now, because the level of talent in that room, and we've talked about it ad nauseum, is exceptional. I mean, truly exceptional. It's hard to find two good tackles, and Georgia has a bevy of them that would be the envy of many, many programs that are young and super talented and just need that time and experience on the field to make it happen. And I think that's what the draw of a Coach Searles is. I mean, having been at Virginia Tech, Miami, and North Carolina most recently, part of what he's done is develop talent, and they're not able to recruit the way Georgia is. They don't have the 4- and 5-star guys. So he's moving the needle with a number of these players and has done so in this level at collegiate sports for the past 2+ decades. I mean, the man has been around the game. He's an offensive lineman who played the game himself and has coached it at this level at various times and just developing talent. I think that's important. And with the amount of talent we have to be maximizers. We have to see the Tate Ratledges, the Mims, the Joneses, these young, super gifted players that have all the tools and natural given abilities move, get better. And I think that's what you get when you hire an offensive line coach who's been around the game as long as Coach Searles has. He's a developer. He's somebody that knows how to get the most out of a player. So I think that really bodes well, and that's what he's going to be judged based on. How can you get these young, talented players plugged in various ways, even if it's not their natural position, which I think we could probably argue is the case for Jamari Salyer for the past couple of years. And just because they're so ultimately gifted, how do we get the best 5 out on the field when you've got a pool of 12 best to pull from? And, that's how he's going to be judged. And luckily for him, I think you've got such an amazing amount of talent in that room that you can push each other and really raise the standard. This has the potential for the next couple of years to be some of the best offensive line play that Georgia football has seen.
In the time we have left, let me go back here on the departure of Matt Luke. And when something like this happens, John, it's a little bit difficult to know exactly what occurred. Certainly does not appear that Luke was fired. It seems like he's still, in fairly, good graces with the coaching staff in general. But, as I said before, it was not a perfect offensive line situation for UGA last year, maybe not in 2020 there either. I guess, what do you make of the way in which Luke steps away from the program?
Well, from everything that I've heard, and I haven't talked to Coach Luke personally, so it's going to only be based off third-party accounts. Uh-huh. But what he said in his statement of I'm stepping away to spend more time with my family, that I appreciate this opportunity at Georgia, and I loved being a part of Coach Smart's. I hold that to be true until proven otherwise. The demands of a college coach right now are almost unbelievable, because you're constantly recruiting. That's been the case forever. We get that. But you're also recruiting your own team. You're recruiting from other teams. The transfer portal works two ways. So, for these 4- and 5-star guys that come in thinking that they're instantly going to walk on the field and change the game, and humbly, BA, I mean, I've been in those shoes where I thought having all these college recruiters come to my house and tell me how great I was, that you feel like, okay, well, if that's true, I'm just going to step right in and beat the cornerstone. Right. That's not the case.
Right.
And that's okay. But you're constantly trying to keep engaged these 18, 19-year-old kids that want to and have the aspirations for being the guy. And until you become the guy, it can be a difficult situation. So not only are you recruiting these high school kids to join your program, you're trying to retain those that you've recruited for the past couple of years to come to your program. And now you're recruiting from the transfer portal because it's a whole new mechanism of transfer. And, that's got, in and of itself, just this recruiting aspect of the game, it is so much more demanding than I'm sure I can even understand. So you've added these new levels of expectation for these coaches, not to mention the game, and the season has been so extended that, you play 12 regular season and you got the SEC championship plus 2 games. It's an NFL long season while balancing and trying to maintain the fact that these are student athletes. So the demands are exceptionally high, and, he comes to Georgia after being head coach of a program, which is the ultimate in demand for your time. And he's got kids that are of the age where he's probably thinking, how much of their lives am I missing? Am I sacrificing for some other family's kids? And a lot of coaches have made that choice and find their balance. But for him, it sounds like that he's ready to make a shift in time allocation. And man, I respect it. That's a difficult balance to make.
Yeah, so let me finish with this because I think that's a really important topic. And it seems like right now we're asking coaches to make a choice. You can either be fully present with your family, and you and I both would certainly speak to how important our families are to us. You can be fully present with your family, you're fully present for your team, but it's kind of hard given the time constraints to be able to do both right now. So what that's creating is a scenario in which a lot of these coaching propositions seem to be pretty short term. I mean, at the college level, but also the high school level too, where you see coaches, they work their way up the coaching ladder. They get to this big job, and after a couple of years, it's like, oh, maybe I want something different because of the time constraints this puts on me. And Kirby Smart has talked about, hey, guys go to the NFL because there are certain challenges that college coaches face that you don't find in the NFL right now, and good coaches are leaving college to go to the NFL for that reason. Not necessarily about money, it's about the way in which their time gets allocated. Is this one of those things where it's okay that this is a short-term proposition? It's okay that the intensity of the job only lends itself to doing it for a short period of time before you just get burned out and need to go do something else? Or is this one of those things in which, hey, it's a problem that the coaching profession at the college level asks so much of you that it's no longer realistic to be a lifer at one job in one place for an exceedingly long time anymore?
Yeah, I mean, the gears of the machine have changed the expectations. And, let's not ignore the fact that compensation is increased and you're getting paid, what would be considered astronomical amounts years ago. But, there comes that time where you're weighing the scales. It's not just about money for time. It's also about time in and of itself. And I've got plenty of friends who are now coaches at the NFL level, and they understand that from late July through January, what that expectation is for them. But when that season's over, they've got more free time, and they can manage their schedule. And yes, they're still evaluating players for the draft and getting ready to look at free agency, but it is nowhere close to what the expectations are for a college coach, and specifically position coaches, because I've either got teammates from college or the pros at both levels, and talking to them, the expectations are so very different. One is intense during the season, and you understand that you're going to have a lot more flexibility and free time for the other half of the year. The other is very intense during the season, and it stays almost as intense for the rest of the year. So I think those expectations, when you look at them, you can see there's a stark difference. And, the draw, candidly, BA, I've looked at possibly coaching. Yeah. And, the draw of coaching at the collegiate level is you can make such a huge impact on a player's career and really help them get better at their craft. And it's they're still malleable and influential. You can influence their lives, not just on the field, but off. But you just got to know that's one piece of a much bigger ask. And, in the NFL, you get a much more finished product, and you're talking about refining some rough edges, but it's more about scheme and preparation for game plan during the week than it is of player development and influencing a young man's life. So, from that aspect, you look at it and you go, what it comes down to is, what am I willing to sacrifice? And I think Coach Smart's not incorrect in saying that those scales over time begin to shift, and you're going, I can realize a good return financially at both levels, but I might be willing to sacrifice that influence I'd have on a player for a little more time on influencing my relationships with my family.
Yeah, boy, that's it's a big topic for sure. John, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate that. You're a great guest to have on a day like this in which Georgia's going in a new direction with its offensive line. So we appreciate your insight and appreciate your candor, and look forward to getting a chance to speak to you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia again very soon as well.
Always a good time, BA. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I tell you, I really love all that from John Stinchcomb. I think that's all really well said, especially the end part there about, the challenge that faces coaches. And we would presume that this was at least a part of the scenario involved in Luke somehow, some way, would cause him to kind of want to step down and for now step away from coaching. We'll see how long that lasts. And I, say that knowing, as John kind of touched on, there is a huge financial incentive to all of this. And here's the thing, even though eventually that, hey, it's going to kind of pull me in a direction I don't want to go, which is away from my family. The fact of the matter is, people respond to incentives. And when the incentive of financial reward, but also I hate to say it this way, but just the glory that comes. The way in which shows like this and, writers and whatnot, kind of patch on the back, and we kind of create heroes out of coaches who succeed. That's its own kind of incentive there as well. That the desire to climb the ladder in coaching is not going to go away. Even though there are some personal trade-offs that will maybe make you regret some of the things that you do. The fact of the matter is the incentive to do so is so great that there's always going to be a huge portion of people that just can't say no to it. And, let's face it, we all at times kind of push ourselves to achieve things because just the draw is so great to do that, even though we know, hey, we're kind of maybe making some trade-offs to do that we're not always going to be happy with. It's just, the draw to succeed is just very high. It just is. That path is greatly incentivized. And so for coaches, the same thing is kind of true there. And so for Luke, he kind of finds himself in a position now where taking a break seems to make some sense from him. My guess is that break won't last forever because eventually, you kind of want to get back in the game again. You want to be, on the field. You want to be in your field doing what it is that you've done. And now Georgia turns its attention now to Stacey Searles. We'll talk more about that in relationship to our SEC through coming up. Before that, though, let me remind you that, boy, what a great time it was for me. We talk about cruising around the SEC with Royal Caribbean, and I actually just got back from cruising with Royal Caribbean. I was on Harmony of the Seas for a 7-day trip, and I got to tell you, if my wife was here, she'd say the same thing. We had such an incredible time. So much fun being a part of this great event. And I'll tell you one thing in particular. It was probably the last night of the cruise. We had, it's one of those things where you have all the things you do during the day. And I'm kind of, when it comes to stuff like this, I'm kind of an early bird and a night owl. I'm the first guy up, getting coffee and getting off the ship, whatever port we're going to, but also kind of like to be one of the last guys awake, having fun, doing some of the nighttime stuff there as well. And so at one point in time, we're just kind of walking around, kind of soaking it up. Then we kind of do our own kind of personal pub crawl, on the ship. And at one point in time, it's there was live music going on 5 different places. There's a piano bar, and there's the guitar guy kind of there in one of the pubs, and then you got the jazz lounge, you got the jazz music playing, you got a rock band playing over here, you got kind of a Latin theme there at the Boleros bar, and it's wow, you got live music going on right now, 5 different places. You just kind of go get whatever drink you want and have whatever experience you want. And like, this is what fun is really all about. This is kind of like what Royal Caribbean really does, is setting the standard for the action that takes place there on a ship. And I enjoyed it so much this past week, and I can't wait to enjoy it with a lot of you. We do our own Royal Caribbean cruise coming up in April. Now, if you go to DawgNation.com, you're going to find out more about this. Our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority helping you getting all this booked up right now, but still some limited space to be a part of the DawgNation cruise, setting sail April 25th, leaving out of Port Canaveral. That's the same port I just cruised from. We're going to be on Independence of the Seas, and we're going to Nassau in the Bahamas. That's a port I was just at. We had a great snorkeling trip while we were in Nassau, enjoying all of that. The harbor there is beautiful, and going out and snorkeling over the reefs was so much fun there. Spending time in town, you can go to Paradise Island, you can do all that kind of stuff. Nassau's a great port to visit. I was just there. Perfect Day Coco Cay. You've heard me talk about that. It was absolutely unbelievable. I had not been there since it really kind of become Perfect Day Coco Cay, with the thrill side, the chill side. I had not really done that, but boy, I tell you, I loved every second of it. You will there as well. So be there with us. It's going to be so much fun. As much fun as I had, being on this past cruise, it just has me thinking about how much I can't wait to be with all of you there too. So DawgNation.com, you can find the link. You can get in there. You can go to DawgNationCruise.com as well. Just that website alone can help get you the information you need. Cruise and Vacation Authority, getting you booked up. April 25th, we're setting sail there from Port Canaveral, going to Nassau, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. They're on the Independence of the Seas. You can also reach out to Cruise and Vacation Authority directly, tcava.com. That's the website, tcava.com, or give them a call, 770-952-8300, 770-952-8300. That'll get you that. All right, let me bounce through a few of these stories with our SEC through pretty quickly because our music has kind of run out on us. So it's the butt of jokes, it's punchline, and we'll take the easy route here there as well, that Todd Grantham appears to be hired by Nick Saban as a defensive analyst here, bringing him in as kind of a quality control guy with the Alabama program. And obviously Grantham's that guy that Georgia fans have loved having some fun with for a good long time because of the third and Grantham stuff and the way in which Grantham was such an easy foil while defensive coordinator at Florida, and really even at Mississippi State before that, kind of that very goofy lieutenant for Dan Mullen at a couple of different coaching stops. And obviously we think that's kind of funny here there as well. Georgia certainly had its way with Todd Grantham for the most part. But it's also kind of a reminder of this too, which is that there is a story to coaches that is different than their public persona. And John Stinchcomb touched on some of this a moment ago, that, hey, a lot of Georgia fans think they know Stacey Searles for the results that happened while he was here, but there's any number of things that kind of factor into what you see as the on-field result, what you see as kind of the public persona that a coach has, that there's any number of things that both are in control of the coach and not in his control that impact that. But there's a level of football knowledge that coaches know about each other that, for the most part, we don't have full appreciation of. And there's no doubt that Todd Grantham knows football. Now, maybe over the course of time you say, well, he kind of proved himself to be the kind of person that knew so much about football that it almost became paralysis by analysis, where he had a hard time instructing on what he did know. And maybe he had players who played stiff or players who played a little scared because they were just constantly filled with so much information that they couldn't actually go out there and be free-flowing athletes the way that you want them to be. Maybe that was true, but no one would deny that Grantham knows football. And from that standpoint, he's valuable to Nick Saban. And maybe there's a kind of a tie over here with Georgia going back down the road, the route of Stacey Searles as offensive line coach, that we have a perception of Searles based on what we've seen from him publicly at his time at Georgia, but maybe the actual story of what he is as a coach is a little different than that. Maybe guys like Kirby Smart and Todd Monken, maybe they know more about that than we get a chance to, only appreciating the public persona that exists. And frankly, sometimes these things have a tendency to play out in ways that are somewhat surprising, that sometimes when you hire the kind of the sure thing coach that is a Grand Slam hire, sometimes it doesn't quite turn out to be that way. I mean, for instance, keep it with Alabama here for a moment, whose offensive line coach this past year was Doug Marrone. Marrone was generally treated as a Grand Slam home run perfect hire for Alabama. Former NFL head coach, now working as your offensive line coach, and The Crimson Tide offensive line was probably pretty good last year. I don't know that Marrone was universally praised by Alabama fans. I don't know that the Alabama offensive line was universally praised this past season. Certainly the running game was not maybe what it had been in previous years, for the Crimson Tide. So sometimes these coaching hires have a way of being somewhat surprising. What appears to be a perfect sure thing, not always working out that way. What appears to be a little bit of kind of questionable hires, sometimes they have a tendency to work out a little bit better the second time than they did the first time. So all of that worth keeping in mind now that Georgia kind of going back down the direction of Stacey Searles, it appears as its offensive line coach. A couple other things here really quickly. Kentucky loses its offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen, to the San Francisco 49ers. To the Los Angeles Rams. Cohen going back to his previous stop there. It's the 49ers that Kentucky turns to for its next offensive coordinator. Rich Scangarello, former quarterbacks coach there with the 49ers, coming into Kentucky. So the move from the NFL to the Wildcats seemed to work out pretty well with Cohen a year ago. He was very, very well received in his 1 year in the SEC, and we'll see if it works out the same way for Scangarello there as well. Also, Dennis Dodd, CBSSports.com, had a very interesting story over the weekend about the fact that attendance across the board in college football went down for the 7th consecutive year. Now, some of this is kind of based on the fact that, hey, you're adding more teams into like the FBS level, and they are former FCS teams that don't have very big stadiums, don't have very big followings, and so that's kind of drawing your average down. But it's not quite that simple to sort of say all of this is related to that. In some respects, you even look at the SEC. You have at least a few hundred per game attendance down in the SEC, even at places like, say, South Carolina, where they're way better in 2021 than they were the last year of full attendance in 2019. Their numbers still down this year from an attendance standpoint. Arkansas, one of the few places in the SEC where attendance was way up. In fact, Greg Sankey was quoted in the story from Dennis Dodd at CBSSports.com, and I just want to read you this quote very quickly here to kind of speak to what Sankey views as a pending problem, kind of an imminent concern for the sport. He says that right now there's plenty of negativity around the collegiate sports world. People have said, well, these decisions won't affect fan interest. Well, something certainly is. It's not just TV, and it's not just COVID. We have to rethink our approach on key issues, Sankey says. That's almost a Captain Obvious moment, Sankey concludes by saying there. So, in other words, the SEC commissioner says, hey, you can't blame the attendance issues strictly on COVID alone, and you can't blame the attendance issues strictly on fans now choosing to prefer to watch games on television as opposed to entering the stadium and sitting there as a spectator in the crowd. Sankey says that some of the negativity around the collegiate sports world and things that are happening, I'm assuming he's referencing like NIL and transfer portal and some things related to that, they are kind of a little bit an anchor on the sport right now, dragging it down, or at least dragging down its progress. Kind of an interesting, eye-opening statement there from Greg Sankey, one worth exploring, I would say, in the future. But for now, we'll put a cap on that as cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Also, shouts out to the dogs on tour around here. We like to keep up with other UGA athletes and what they're doing in other sports. Obviously, big weekend for UGA baseball and UGA softball, and more success from Matthew Bowling. But want to highlight in particular here Sepp Straka, former dog on tour. I should say former UGA golfer turned dog on tour, getting his first PGA Tour win in the Honda Classic. Nice tweet there from the UGA golf coach Chris Hack, saying that love that he was celebrating with his fellow Bulldogs. It's the greatest golf fraternity to be a member of. Go Dogs, UGA Tour, Dogs on Tour. Sepp Straka, the latest former dog to win on the PGA Tour, and well received there by some of the former UGA guys also there on the PGA Tour. Such a great moment in the locker room there at the Honda Classic. Certainly congratulations to Straka on that, as he gets the win, no doubt toasting that with a Finnish long drink, if you will. Obviously, we love the Finnish long drink around here. I don't know if Straka was doing that or not, but certainly you can do that to toast your great moments and great successes with the Finnish long drink. Obviously, it's a great tasting, ready-to-drink cocktail right out of the can. It looks like a beer because it comes in a can, but it's a ready-to-drink cocktail that you can enjoy 4 different varieties. You get the blue can, which is the traditional gin kick with the grapefruit flavor. You get the long drink cranberry, which is a red can. The black can, which is the long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. I know some of y'all like that. Long drink zero carbs, zero sugar. Just all kinds of great choices for you when it comes to finished long drink. 4 different varieties. In fact, you actually get one of the 8-can variety packs, which is 2 different cans of each of the 4 different long drink varieties. You can enjoy that today. In fact, find out where you can pick some up. TheLongDrink.com. You can see that there. TheLongDrink.com. And enjoy some finished long drink today wherever you are. Golf course near you, bar near you, beverage store near you. If you go to thelongdrink.com, you can find out all about it and figure out where you can pick some up today. So enjoy yourself some finished long drink. And as we wrap up here, we'll do a golden shoe. And a lot of folks still basking in the glow and celebrating their national championship. I show you this here on Twitter. I thought this was very funny and kind of a cool way to celebrate the national championship. Earl Wise, the wiser one, shares this from Wiser Dog on Twitter, saying, "It's done. I honor my commitments," and he gets his national championship tattoo. So you see the Georgia G, the date, January 10th, 2022. That's when it all goes down for UGA, right there in the back of the calf. To be shown for everyone forever, Georgia as the national champion. Earl Wise says, "This is worthy of a golden shoe. What say you, DawgNation Daily?" And I say, yes, indeed, it definitely is. Congratulations to Earl Wise to being our golden shoe winner today. Wiser Dog for getting his tattoo. That's good to be able to see. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? New offensive line coach in place for UGA, but same result. 4,799 days since Florida's won a national championship. Long drought for that program. Then Gator Hater countdown back in Jacksonville, 243 days from right now. Good news for Georgia getting another win of those lousy, stinking Gators. Hey, y'all have a great day. Thanks for letting me be back with you here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window in Door of Georgia. We'll see you back here again tomorrow. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. First time doing this with all of you in quite some time. We'll take some time to do some of your comments here today as we obviously react to big news. Reportedly, Stacey Searles, the offensive line coach for UGA, back in the fold with the Dogs. Not well received by everybody, but the general mood is, hey, Kirby Smart has shown you that he knows what he's doing in the past, and maybe this is another example of that. So we will kind of get your thoughts on some of this here right now. Let's see what else. Blind Squirrel Sports says, my knowledge of college football comes from a fan's point of view, so I'll trust Kirby to keep doing what he's proven himself to do well. Welcome back, Coach Searles. Go Dogs. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that you can look at a lot of assistant coaches, just to be completely frank, that were great one place and terrible somewhere else. So the idea that the guy that you think is going to be great is always going to be great doesn't always work out that way. Or the guy that you think of as terrible doesn't really always work out that way either. I mean, take a guy like Kevin Steele, for instance, who, is now thought of as a great defensive coordinator. But it wasn't that long ago that he wasn't really thought of that way. I mean, this was a guy who had some kind of embarrassing chapters in his career at one point in time. But Auburn boosters certainly loved him. Being hired at Miami was generally received as a very big deal. This is a guy who's now thought of as great, whereas at one point in time, kind of wasn't really thought of that way. Just different guys have had different. I mean, I don't know that. I mean, just certain guys have periods of their career where it kind of all works out well, and they just are universally treated as one of the best at their job. But in coaching over the course of the long haul, you see kind of an EKG of results where it's great one place, it's not so great the next, and it's great somewhere else. That some of these things are a little bit difficult to predict from time to time, and it's not my role here to try to completely explain all this away. I told this John Sinchcomb, I don't mind telling you there either, that there's a portion of the Searles hire that I'm like, really, what is this about? I don't quite get it all either. I am inclined to somewhat say, well, there must be something about this I don't know, because for the most part, Georgia makes effective coaching hires. That's kind of what the track record has been. So if this hire has been made, it's more likely than not to kind of fit into the pattern of the previous coaching hires that Kirby's made. I'm willing to say that, but I'm not going to completely whitewash all of this and say, oh yeah, this is perfect. Let me tell you why this is great, because there's an element of curiosity that I have about this that probably matches the way that some of you feel there too. Let's see what else. Mark Brantley says, I think that having Searles back will be good. It's much easier to recruit in Athens today than it was under Rick. Plus, he's been recruiting in a couple of hotbeds for talent in the last 10 years. Yeah, it's interesting when you think about, kind of where he's been. When you're at North Carolina, you're kind of tied in on some of that Hampton Roads area, and you kind of have that pipeline of talent down in the South Florida area there as well. It's actually an interesting point that he's got, now exposure in some pretty important geographical areas. I'd say that's probably true. Jay Shipe says, was able to bring the life-size cutout of Jimbo Fisher on the cruise ship. That's very funny, Jay. Very funny. Let's see what else. GATA404 Dog says, Stacey Searles is an underwhelming hire. I think that probably does reflect the way that a handful of Georgia fans do feel. Maybe even the majority of Georgia fans, that underwhelming might be the word they would use to describe this. Let's see what else. He also says that Kirby's going to burn out Stacey in a few years. Yeah, I don't know that Kirby's necessarily burning anybody out as much as I think the nature of the sport is burning people out right now. And I don't know if that's what happened with Matt Luke or not. I'm not going to pretend to know that. But I do think that one of the things you got to be very mindful of is I don't think it's tenable for the sport in the future to have a situation where you are having to recruit your entire roster 365 days a year. I just don't think that's tenable. If you set up a scenario where that's the case, where you're in danger of losing a guy at any moment, then all of a sudden now it almost restricts your ability to even coach them. I'm not talking about I've always been a big believer that you don't have to be demeaning to be demanding, that I want coaches who demand without demeaning. That to me, hard coaching is setting a standard and demanding that your players achieve that standard, both in terms of how they perform and how they act. Everything that the fullness of them as men, young men. That to me is what a demanding standard is about. It doesn't have to be demeaning in terms of yelling at them or whatever else. Like the standard is what pushes the player to be better, not anything else. But this notion that all of a sudden now you can't have as high a standard as a coach. All of a sudden now you can't push players to get better because you're afraid you might push them on out the door. Like that's handcuffing coaches, and that's restricting players from getting what the college experience is supposed to be for them. Ultimately what college is subsidized training from the very best football experts in the world. Like that's really what it is. Think about all the guys that hope to get college scholarships. Think about how many of them pay money out of their family's pocket to get specialized training in their sport. And, when you go out of college, all of a sudden now you start paying for that same kind of stuff again to get trained up for the NFL draft so you can run the cone drill or all that kind of stuff. You get the specialized training to be ready for your pro day and all that kind of stuff. So kind of before college and after college, players are paying for this training themselves. Or at least in theory they are. But while in college, that training from the very best coaching minds that exist, the very best training experts that exist, is paid for the players. They get a chance to enjoy that free. And that's really the value of the college experience is the subsidized training that they get. But if coaches are afraid to give that training to the player because they feel like, well, if they get a taste of it, they're going to go somewhere where it's easier. All of a sudden now you're really hurting the players by not giving them the chance to get the coaching that they deserve. Senio G says, we missed you. Thanks for that. I appreciate that. He says, I'm also not going to say the Searles hire is a bad hire. It's just weird, but maybe he can do more with more because that UNC offensive line hasn't been good at all. So I think weird is probably a good way to describe this, that, hey, if you're moved, like when Pittman moved on, and you hired Matt Luke, that seemed like a pretty big flex. That seemed like Georgia went out and got a former SEC head coach to be its offensive line coach, and it's this gregarious personality. All of that seemed to make a lot of sense. The Searles thing by comparison seems to make less sense. So I'll tolerate weird as a description here. Let's see what else. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. Let's see what else. DT weighing in about what he calls mediocre hires. So I don't think the Brian McClendon hire is mediocre. I think the Brian McClendon hire, and that's a former UGA guy now back in the fold, I think of that as a pretty big time hire. And I think the Mike Bobo hire has just been completely over discussed. He is nothing more than an analyst. He is a quality control guy in the program. I think a lot of people have this thought of, well, it's Mike Bobo. I think they have an inflated sense of Bobo's impact on the program right now. I just don't. I mean, he is here because it's fun to be at UGA, and he's got son on the team, and it's kind of a cool thing to hang around the program. Like I don't think of the Bobo thing as a very big deal. I mean, I think it's good to have him around. He knows a lot about football. But I think a lot of people have kind of made the Bobo thing into something symbolic when it's just not, at least in my mind. He's just another voice around the program. So I don't make too much of that one way or another. As far as the unknown of who you bring in as outside linebackers coach, a little bit of a new name on the scene in terms of your defensive backs coach. Maybe you'll kind of figure some of that kind of stuff out. But, for the most part, I don't know that I would call the coaching hires that have taken place this offseason mediocre. I mean, I think you have a collection of different profiles. You have, in one case, a guy like Searles, who Georgia fans probably feel like they know a lot about, and a case like, Yusa Uribe, a guy that you know very, very little about, Fran Brown, maybe something kind of in between. So I would say that it's a lot to get acquainted with. Maybe a lot to get acquainted with. Doug Rayburn says that Trey Scott was also at North Carolina. He's worked out pretty well. That is true. Georgia's defensive line coach was at North Carolina for a good while. Was then hired at Ole Miss and didn't really coach at all at Ole Miss before coming here. I think the one thing that makes maybe Trey Scott different than Searles in the mind of some is that Scott was a true young up-and-comer. At this point in time, Stacey Searles is a little bit more of a known commodity. He's had more time to establish his track record. Lucy Bowers-Boykin also mentioning that Matos, the Baylor offensive line coach, I guess withdrew his name from consideration. It's been reported that he was staying at Baylor. So, sometimes it's kind of hard to know how much of this is like the coach trying to make a name for himself. Clearly the program likes to use this. In fact, the Baylor athletic, the football account has kind of pumped him up a lot since he made the decision or the report came out that he was staying at Baylor. And so, was this Georgia's first choice and they got turned down by Matos and now moved on to Stacey Searles? The timeline would suggest that's probably the case. How real is some of that? I just don't know. I don't know. Greg Childer says it's not Searles per se. I just thought after winning the title, UGA would finally boom with the recruits. No matter who we lost as coaches, we would replace. And since we have, had decommits and added former Rick Staffer. So what Greg is saying is, hey, you look at the last few days, new cycle of losing a couple of recruits and kind of going back to staffers that were previously here under Mark Richt. Yeah, I don't get too stressed out about decommits this soon into the 2023 process. I mean, that door swings both ways. That in some respects, hey, maybe a guy decommits because he's got a better offer. In other cases, maybe it's fresh new priorities for the new coaches that are in place too. That it's just as likely that Georgia, with the fresh scholarship offer available, now goes out and gets an even better prospect. I mean, given Georgia's track record, you have to at least consider that as a possibility. That I am just not going to get that stressed out about a couple of 2023 decommits this soon in the 2023 process. In fact, I mean, if you want to just keep it to the McClendon thing here in a moment after the Sorey decommitment, I mean, I'm very optimistic that Brian McClendon can open some doors for Georgia to be involved with recruits that are, certainly of a different level than what they previously would have been involved with. And when it comes to defensive back stuff, I mean, I think the long-standing track record for UGA stands up pretty well on that. Yeah, Chad Williams says, Brian McClendon, Mike Bobo, Stacey Searles. I've seen that show before, 10-2 every year. So this is an example of kind of what I was saying before, which is that obviously McClendon's your wide receivers coach and Stacey Searles is now your offensive line coach, But Mike Bobo is not on this coaching staff. Mike Bobo is an analyst here for this program. And I just don't think that, for the people who feel like they know what Mike Bobo is and kind of what Mike Bobo has meant as an offensive coordinator, he is not Georgia's offensive coordinator. He's not. Mike Bobo is not telling Todd Monken what to do. I just don't believe there's any chance that's the case. I just don't. He is an analyst, quality control guy, and nothing more than that. So if you think that Bobo's influence on an offense is negative, I don't think you have that much to worry about. I don't think he has any influence on this offense. In the case of the Searles thing, I told you before that there's a part of me that's kind of curious how all this works out too. I think it's a little bit weird. But in the case of McClendon, I was very happy about that. So I guess I'm kind of, I'm a little bit more situation specific, case by case. McClendon hire, great. Bobo hire, to me, is irrelevant. The Searles hire, a little weird. A little weird to me. Let's see what else. Cyrano Watson says he thinks the Searles hire is a good hire, so he's liking that. Bill Kelly says, don't we still have more players we can keep on the roster? Yeah, there's still a bit of roster management that's got to be done. Bill Kelly also talking about the future of a new basketball coach, which is certainly a very real possibility. Here's some numbers from Cyrano to back up what he said before. UNC's 2021 offense posted 35.2 points per game and 468.2 yards per game, both third best in the ACC, while leading the conference with 2,763 rushing yards. Searles' offensive line has helped produce the most 1,000-yard rushers nationally over the last 3 seasons with 5. So some numbers from Cyrano there to back up his feeling about Stacey Searles. Let's see what else. Greg Childer says, how do you think Monken feels with the hiring of Bobo than the next hires being former staff members of Bobo? Almost a coup. Yeah, I don't think it's a coup at all. I just don't think it is. I mean, trust me, Todd Monken's status at UGA could not be higher. He just led Georgia to a national championship, and he created a 40-point per game offense despite all kinds of injuries at wide receiver, and a former walk-on quarterback who played at a higher level than almost any of us thought would have been imaginable for him. The idea that somehow Monken's status is now threatened, or that Monken somehow has got less, footing to stand on than he had before, I think the opposite is true. Do you think that? This would be like saying, I guess Pete Golding is threatened by the arrival of Todd Grantham as an analyst. That's just not really the way, that it works very much. These quality control guys are valuable to have in your program because it's just an extra pair of hands, an extra pair of eyes, an extra pair of, an extra set of football knowledge. But I do truly think that the Bobo hire has been grotesquely exaggerated in the minds of some fans because they feel like they have story, track record, previous history with Bobo. And so therefore they turn it into like a referendum on the Bobo era. For some reason, that was always kind of controversial. You had a lot of folks that liked Bobo, a lot of folks that kind of didn't. He was always kind of a lightning rod for conversation. Offensive coordinators typically are. Bobo maybe excessively so. So because of that long-standing history at UGA, I think the hiring of Bobo as an analyst has just been exaggerated. I don't think his presence in Athens is a very big deal at all. I just don't. I don't think it's all that consequential. He's just here in a very small role. I don't think he has enough power to produce a coup. Anybody would want Brian McClendon as wide receivers coach for the most part. That's a guy that's done it several different places at a very high level, very impactful from a recruiting standpoint, spending time away, by the way, from Mike Bobo as well, in part in doing that you would definitely want that. The Searles thing is a little bit more weird, but I don't necessarily view this as sort of a Mike Bobo-led coup. I don't view it that way. What else? Randy Hall also kind of reminding us, as I said before, that, and one of our other commenters brought this up, that, having spent some time in Miami, you got the South Florida ties, spending some time in UNC. Remember, if you're the coach at North Carolina, the place you're really recruiting right now is that kind of Hampton Roads corridor, that coastal Virginia area. And it will be interesting to see if Searles brings some ties there on that. Craig Chalmers says if Alabama started hiring a bunch of Grantham staffers, maybe they would think a coup was coming. Touche, Craig. Touche. Let's see what else. Chad Williams says Bobo isn't just an analyst. He's Kirby's buddy. He has more pull than an analyst does. Yeah, I don't know about that. Randy Hall says Buster is a great insurance policy. Yeah, I mean, for me, like, who has a greater influence on the Georgia offense right now, Mike Bobo or Buster Faulkner? I don't think there's any doubt it's Buster Faulkner. I don't think there's any doubt, for a number of reasons, that Faulkner is a more important analyst for Georgia than Bobo is. And I say that as a guy who kind of likes Mike Bobo. I think the last couple of years for Bobo have been, probably not his best as a coach, but I have a generally favorable opinion as Bobo as a coach. But in terms of the offensive analysts at Georgia who have influence on the program, I would rank Faulkner far higher than I would rank Mike Bobo, if for no other reason than Faulkner's relationship, presumably, with Arch Manning. Let's see what else. By the way, Lucy Bowers Boykin bring up a very good point. Congratulations go out to Terrence Edwards, our good friend, and a great new job for him on the Milton coaching staff. Always a very talent-rich program, so happy to see Terrence moving on to Milton there, and kind of a big role for Milton next season. That's great to see. Nick Roundtree says Joel Moody is going under the knife this morning. It's a little bit of surgery for Joel. I did not know that, Nick. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. And obviously, we will keep him in our prayers around here. We love Joel's comments. It's a big part of what we do here on a regular basis. So I appreciate you letting me know about that. Thank you very much. Bob Collins says, with all the drama, he says, I think Kirby's got this. Enjoy the ride. This has turned into the old lady snapping peas, getting to everybody's business. Yeah, there's always going to be a nature of curiosity about stuff like this. Lucy Bowers Boykin also mentioning moving James Coley, the offensive coordinator. Yeah, like that's one of the examples of one of the bad coaching hires. There haven't been a ton of those for Georgia under Smart, but obviously I would say the promotion of Coley probably among the very worst there on that. And to Bob Collins' point, this is why Georgia fans are always going to be very intrigued by every coaching arrival and coaching departure, and there's always just going to be a lot of fascination around stuff like this because, well, for the most part, they seem to work out pretty well. They don't always work out perfectly, and so maybe bad memories of something like Coley is one of the things that gets people fired up on a thing like this. O'Neill, 1975, says, where did I get this pullover? This came from the UGA bookstore right there next to the Tate Student Center across from Sanford Stadium. This is from the UGA bookstore. And it is perfectly white, by the way. It looks like, at least on this one monitor over here, it looks kind of cream colored, but it is perfectly white. J-Bob brings up a good point that, if you want to know, kind of what Mike Bobo's influence is on UGA, the fact that he's making $100,000 compared to, Todd Monken making $1.25 million, that sort of relative financial impact gives you an idea of the relative influence, I think, there as well. Senior Dog 54 says, I believe the national championship or nothing mentality has hurt college attendance. People like Feinbaum talking about meaningless bowl games, and unfortunately some fans have bought into that. As Brian Wilson once sang, be true to your school. So I definitely think that there is kind of let me see if I can say this the way I want to say it. I think there's something to what Senior Dog is saying here. Like, the thing that concerns me a little bit is it seems like we used to get really excited about Georgia playing Tennessee or Georgia playing South Carolina, these somewhat regional rivals. And for now, for the most part, those games don't really move the meter the way they used to. Now, Georgia's an incredibly popular subject, so every game is a big deal. But those games being a big deal in and of themselves don't seem as true as they once did 20 or 25 years ago. That it's become solely focused on who's in the playoff and who's going to win the national championship. That obsession with that has hurt the rest of the sport. But now you've got this weird thing where for the most part, the college football playoff is not as popular as it once was. So you've got this weird cannibalization where the college football playoff has kind of swallowed up part of the other sport. All of a sudden now the playoff has kind of become passe, where like this year's title game between Georgia and Alabama was higher rating than one it was a year ago, but the playoff games overall were much lower rated than they have been in the past, and the ratings kind of go down year after year after year. And there's just not much you can do about that because, I mean, some of the games in which have been lower rated have been like Notre Dame and Ohio State and, Alabama and, teams like that have these big national followings. Clemson, kind of a small fan base, but been on the national scene now for a number of years. They've, seen their ratings decline there too in games they've been involved with. That there is something going on with college football right now. I don't quite know that I know how to describe it or how I would kind of fix it, but there is something going on here. When you go back and read what Greg Sankey said in the piece with Dennis Dodd, CBS Sports, that this is something to at least pay attention to. I don't think I'm not alarmist about it or anything like that, but there is something going on that the powers that be don't exactly know how to fix. I think that's probably true. Richard D says, in light of our potential offensive line, the departure of Zeus and Cook, who do you see as the prominent staple of running back in 2022? So the first crack at that, I believe, is going to be Kendall Milton and Kenny McIntosh, the chance to establish the tandem that has kind of been in place for the very best moments in Georgia football. I think that they're going to get the first crack at this, and I think they're going to respond very well to that. I am really curious to see what Branson Robinson can do as a freshman, just because of how he looks and kind of the attitude that he kind of professes. He does remind you of great running backs of the past, including guys that have been here at UGA. The Nick Chubb comparison comes up from time to time. That I am excited about seeing what he's able to do, but there is also something about Kendall Milton, who's waited his time at Georgia. He's dealt with some injury, and you hope he's healthy now. And he kind of has the spotlight to himself, and you kind of have an idea of what Kenny McIntosh is able to do. He's kind of almost a little bit in that James Cook mold, a little bit. That seeing what those guys are able to do. And listen, here's the one thing that I can say with certainty, and I kind of try to touch on this during the regular show today as well. I do not know what Stacy Searles' impact long-term at Georgia is going to be. Can he recruit as well as the previous coaches have at UGA? I think that remains to be seen. But for now, I almost don't really care about that all that much. Georgia's got some great potential talent in its offensive line room, and if you can create a best five that includes a veteran holdover like Warren McClendon, obviously Cedric Von Prine, adding to that a healthy Tate Ratledge, full season of Broderick Jones, the emergence of Marius Mims. Like that has the potential to be a great offensive line, regardless of who the coach is. Maybe Searles will come in and get more out of them. Who knows? But that has the potential to be a great offensive line. And much the same way that the improvement in the offensive line from 2016 to 2017 created much bigger opportunities for guys like Chubb and Michelle in that offense there at the time. I mean, guys like Milton and McIntosh, if you just want to keep it to them for a moment, how much could they benefit from an improved offensive line that really, I believe, that while conventional wisdom has Georgia taking a step back the year after winning a national championship, in this one respect, as I said during one of our vacation shows last week, this could be a step forward. Georgia could be better with its offensive line, therefore better with its running game, therefore better offensively all the way around. How much more dominant could Georgia have been last year had the rushing attack been a little bit more in keeping with what previous Georgia rushing attacks had been? That this is actually an area for growth for UGA. And so, yeah, I think the whole Stacy Searles thing remains to be seen if that's a good hire or not. But there is great potential for the offensive line as it is currently constituted at Georgia with the talent you have in that room to be really special this upcoming year. Really, really special. And I think you absolutely have the possibility for a value add at the running back position. I do. I think that's very much the case. O'Neill, 1975, reminding us that Stacy Searles also worked for Nick Saban in 2003, so there's the tie-in there. All right, one more trip around the comment section, and we got to go. Back on Facebook here for a moment. Bill Kelly says, we've got this. We got talent and a really good schedule. Playoff bound again, so Bill's feeling pretty good. You'd like to be able to see that. Nick Roundtree also reminding about Dejon Edwards. Yeah, I think Edwards is really good. I think Edwards is clearly good enough to play. There's no question. So how does he fit in with the Branson Robinson? All that remains to be seen. But yeah, I don't want to discount Edwards because I also believe he's a very good player. I do. All right, let's see what else. Lucy Bowers-Boygan wants to see some changes in terms of how the NCAA kind of manages name, image, likeness, portal, things like that. Yeah, I think for better or for worse, the NCAA is about done. And certainly the model with which it's governed in the past is almost completely over with. And I think that's probably a good thing, I guess. I mean, I like the idea of decentralized leadership. Frankly, I kind of want Greg Sankey making more decisions for Georgia than I want Mark Emmert. I kind of want more decisions made at the conference level, and conferences then can decide if they want to work with each other. But I kind of like the idea of a little bit more hyper local decision making, I guess. So I think one way or another, the NCAA, as we've kind of come to understand it, is just kind of gone. I do. I don't think it has much actual authority or like political power. I just think it's all diminishing. Bill Sanders kind of bringing up the imbalance of success in the South compared to everywhere else, and I think that's probably, to a degree, probably true. I think it is a huge problem that there is just a level of commitment to football down here that just does not exist other places, and that is a huge stumbling block for the sport. I think that's probably true. Thomas Tyson also mentioning Buster Faulkner's relationship with the Arch Manning recruitment. Yeah, I think that's a pretty big deal. Robert Barnes thinks that Stacey Searles is a big-time hire. So there you go. A little bit of a different perspective on that. Aaron Dixon says Branson Robinson's going to have kids making business decisions. Yeah, I can tell you this right now. I got no interest in lowering my shoulder. I got no interest in trying to go low and wrap up around his waist. I promise you that. I got no interest in doing that whatsoever, and I'm sure there are going to be a few others who probably feel the same way. Aaron Dixon also willing to trust Kirby Smart on this. Let's see what else. Wildman Slayer says, just remember what Kirby said. You can have the best coach, but if you don't have the best players, it shows. And that's true. Talent acquisition is still very important. But for now, Searles benefits from the talent that's already in this room, and seeing what you get out of them is probably a pretty good thing. Let's see what else. Is it Cole? I always forget how to, one Cole over here in the comment section enjoyed the Atlanta United game yesterday. See, I saw where they had like a 17-year-old Atlanta native who scored a goal for them yesterday. It's kind of cool. I don't know a lot about Atlanta United, but that's really good. All right, what else? Anything else? We got to go. All right, good stuff. Good comments. Thanks all for being here. By the way, speaking of Atlanta United and everything else, check out all the Atlanta sports news there at ajc.com if you want to follow what's going on there. Really good way to stay up to date on everything happening. Obviously, some very serious stuff happening in the world there too. That's really important. So make sure you follow all that online. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ajc.com, and stay up to date on all of that. So make sure you check that out. You can see that then. And obviously, R.S. Andrews, the R.S. Andrews Cool Down, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can check out all of that online there as well. Good to be back doing the R.S. Andrews Cool Down live with all of you again. Really appreciate Dari and the whole team for making all that possible. Make sure you see them there, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great, great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation.com. You can tell I'm out of practice. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. What I'm trying to say here. I will see all of you there tomorrow.